Welcome to today's webinar, How to Start or Flip an Open Access Journal. Publishers and editors share their stories. We have some great presentations planned for you today. We'll be covering best practices for starting new open access journals and flipping paywall journals to open access publishing models with examples from successful journals. My name is Danielle Padula. I'll be moderating today's webinar. I'm the Community Development Coordinator at Scholastica, an academic journal management platform with integrated peer review and open access publishing software. Our mission is to empower journals to make quality research available more quickly and accessibly. We're so excited to be hosting today's webinar, and we hope it will be of a special value to those involved in academic-led journal publishing. Today's webinar is a lead-up event to the first official academic-led publishing day, which will be held on February 7th, 2019. It's a global digital event aimed at fostering discussions about how members of the scholarly community can develop and support academy-owned publishing initiatives, including libraries, scholarly societies and associations, and university presses, among others. This is a community-run event that Scholastica will be participating in, along with the Library Publishing Coalition, Free Journal Network, Ubiquity Press, Michigan Publishing, and other organizations. And we encourage you to look out for more details. We'll have lots of great resources that day. And we'll also be featuring this webinar as one of those resources. So we hope you'll check out that event. And now, to kick off today's webinar, I'll introduce our guest speakers, whom we so appreciate joining us. With us, we have Jaclyn Sipovic, Digital Publishing Coordinator at Michigan Publishing, Sean Guynes-Vishnick, Journals Coordinator at Michigan Publishing, and Hugh Thomas, Co-Editor-in-Chief of Algebraic Combinatorics. And we do want you to know that we'll be having a Q&A after the main webinar presentation today. We invite everyone in the audience to submit questions. Please submit any questions that you have via Twitter using the hashtag academic-led-OA, or you can type them into the comments box beside this webinar video. So now, without further ado, we'll get started. And we'll start with some quick background on the growing academic-led publishing movement. Academic-led publishing initiatives have really stemmed out of a need to make research more sustainable. Many of us are familiar with the serials crisis that's been ongoing. Academic journals have become highly centralized among the sort of big five corporate publishers who've developed really outsized influence over how scholarship is produced and distributed, and have been able to raise journal prices to, at times, often unsustainable levels as a result. We know that publishers have profit margins rivaling Apple's, and many in academia are arguing that their centralized control of top scholarship is the reason that they're able to keep raising costs. In recent years, we have seen costs of serials skyrocket. And now, as journals are transitioning to open access publishing, we're seeing an alarming trend among article processing charges, or APCs, with increases of 6% a year over the past few years. Should that current rate continue, there's concern that APCs could become the new crisis, that there could be a challenge for the academic community to fund those high costs. So there's sort of this realization that many are coming to terms with, that open access by itself can be an evolution of the serials crisis, but unless there are measures taken to introduce some competition among journals and to force costs down, this will not be a full solution necessarily. There is concern that the cost of open access could become just as alarming as the serials crisis if actions aren't taken. And this is a great quote from Mark Wilson, co-founder of the Free Journal Network, from a recent Conversation article, noting that there are mounting concerns that if corporate publishers remain in control of the majority of research, they could dominate how open systems are devised and use APCs to maintain high revenue streams being extracted from the community. What would that mean? With high APCs, we could go from many scholars being unable to access the research literature to many being unable to publish in leading journals. This would, of course, be an equally alarming problem in terms of research equity. So as a result, many in the academic community are coming together and looking for ways to decentralize control of journals so that corporate publishers are a piece of the big picture and not in full control of the majority of research. In the future, with academic-led publishing, there could be a landscape where publishing is distributed among scholarly societies, library publishing programs like one we'll see today, scholar startup journals, as well as different types of publishers, so not just total corporate control. And a big part of achieving that among the community is starting open access journals and flipping paywalled titles to sustainable open access publishing models. That's, of course, what we'll be looking at today with some great examples from our guests. So with that, we can jump right into our guest presentations. And again, just a reminder that we'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar. Please submit your questions via Twitter using #academic-led-OA or via the chat box at the side of this video window. First, we're going to start out with a presentation from Jaclyn and Sean on Michigan Publishing Services.
So thanks, Danielle, for the introductions and for the context of today's webinar. As mentioned, my name is Jaclyn Sipovic. I'm the Outgoing Journals Coordinator at Michigan Publishing, and presenting with me today is Sean Guynes, who is our Incoming Journals Coordinator. So before we share our experiences regarding best practices for starting an open access journal, it's probably helpful to know where our journals program is situated within the broader context of our organization, and as a result, where our approaches to OA journal publishing are coming from.
So Michigan Publishing is a division of the University of Michigan Library. What this means ultimately is that we're a not-for-profit organization able to utilize the shared infrastructure and expertises that exist within our current library system. So this includes hosting solutions, use of our web developers, copyright and accessibility specialists, as well as digital preservation strategies. And all of this helps us to keep our publishing costs, as you'll see very shortly, relatively low. Michigan Publishing is comprised of 3 divisions. There's the University of Michigan Press, which is your traditional academic publisher, Michigan Publishing Services, which is us, that's where the journals program is located, and Deep Blue Repositories, which is a faculty data bank for research. As a service-oriented publisher, we leave most editorial and policy decisions in the hands of the editors, but leveraging our technological strengths and commitment to broad distribution and accessibility, most of our new publications end up fitting a pretty similar open access profile. For the most part, they are born digital, they're encoded in XML and HTML and are fully searchable. Our authors retain copyright. We use Creative Commons licensing terms in almost all of our journals, and there are no article processing charges. A bit about how we deal with new journals who approach us, or journals who approach us looking to flip to the open access model. So we'll typically have a consultation meeting at the beginning of that process to see how good a fit they are for our program and to see if they've thought through some of the major issues in starting a journal. Some of the key questions we'll ask is what role the publication intends to play or does play in the field, including questions of where contributors are publishing work and what distinguishes this journal from others in the field, what formats the journal is interested in producing and what the audience is looking for. So some journals will just want PDFs for convenience and the look of legitimacy. Some will want print copies and EPUBs, but all of them with our services will get at HTML and XML pages. We want to look for the frequency of publication. So how often does the journal look to publish? We have some journals who publish on annual or rolling basis, as well as others that have different goals for turnaround. What sort of editorial board does the journal look to utilize, and what is the expectation of involvement for the editors and editorial board? What type of peer review are they looking to implement, and do they need any technological support for that process? What sort of journal policies will the journal enact in order to fulfill its mission regarding copyright, licensing, and peer review? And what questions does the journal have about field legitimacy, which has been one of the pressing issues in making open access more viable for journal publishing, as well as access to financial support? So our approach is to offer a few pieces of advice that we think are the most important for considering starting an open access journal or flipping to an open access journal. So we think it's best that people plan to start with an annual publication and work up to whatever it is that they are attempting to do, whether it's biannual, triannual, or quarterly. And to keep in mind that planning the first issue is a lot of work. This means building in time for initial setbacks, whether it's in the form of soliciting enough manuscripts, workflow challenges that arrive, and to generally be very realistic about time management. A typical timeline for our journals is 6 to 12 months to get the first issue out. from the moment that we accept a proposal to work with a journal. We also think it's a good idea for journals to consider funding and support for the first 3 to 5 years to ensure that the journal can continue publishing regularly, and to think about contingency issues. So what's going to happen if a new editor comes onto the scene? How is the journal going to turn over to new editors?
So we usually preface this part of the conversation with this, that missions still do cost money. Depending on the services that a journal is going to need from us, our baseline fees are around $1,000 to $3,000 annually. Of course, there are numbers on either end of this range depending on a number of factors, including how many articles a year a journal is going to publish. So built into this cost are a number of baseline services. We offer custom site builds for all of our journals, a web hosting platform, XML conversion, so articles can be fully searchable and crawled by relevant indexers, DOI registration, ISSN registration. We offer Google Analytics and Altmetrics reporting for all of our journals. We manage indexing applications and deposit management. And we also work very closely with our journals on an ongoing basis regarding copyright, editorial workflows, and financial discussions. All of our journals are preserved as part of the University of Michigan Library digital collections. The add-on services that we do offer are access to submission management tools. Currently, our program uses Submittable. We also offer copy editing services, typesetting services, and the option to print the journal on demand and distribute via Chicago Distribution Center and Amazon. When starting to think about planning an open access journal, I think it's probably important to decide very early on what your ideal time, money, goals balance is going to be. Is a full service platform your ideal situation? Do you want to be able to pick and choose services, or do you want a complete package? Do you want someone else handling marketing and promotion? I think the great thing about academic-led publishing, as Danielle pointed out, is there are an increasing number of options with various level of overhead. So more traditional press models, library publishing models, scholar startups. I think maybe it's an old joke, or maybe I've only heard it a few times, but in journal publishing is that good, fast, cheap, you can pick two. But I think one of the goals of academic-led publishing technology initiatives is that the gap between all three of those is increasingly closed. So even still, you are probably asking, how do we fund these journals, or how do these journals fund themselves? It's a really good question, and I don't think there is any one good answer. The most common funding model in our program is by far institutional support. So journals will attach themselves to an organization, or they will be a natural outgrowth of an organization. They will also be situated within a university department. And sometimes editors will use faculty research funds to support the journal. A number of other journals that we publish also use sponsorships, donations, grants, and a few of them sell print-on-demand copies to offset costs. So a few examples. Dialectic is a new open access journal. They started about 2 years ago, and they are published or supported by AIGA, which is a national organization. So they completely use institutional support to fund the journal. And what that means is that we help Dialectic demonstrate the impact of their scholarship via Google Analytics reports, Altmetric reports, and print-on-demand sales data, and AIGA maintains the support of the publication. Weave, Journal of Library User Experience, uses institutional support and a number of sponsorships. That basically means that they go out and generate this supplemental support from relevant institutions. Philosopher's Imprint funds their overhead costs almost completely with donations. And the way that this works for them is that, having been around since 2001 and really working hard to establish a sound reputation in their field, they receive enough submissions and donations to fund our hosting fees and then some. One more example on our end, Deaf Studies Digital Journal is completely funded at this point by grants. They are working to relaunch with Michigan Publishing, and we have been listed as a sub-awardee on an NEH Digital Humanities grant. And this supports close collaboration on accessibility practices and digital preservation of video articles. And I think this is just an example to show that being a library publisher makes us uniquely suited to participate with our publications in this way.
So to wrap up, from our perspective, some of the major challenges and benefits to academic-led open access publishing are sort of as follows. The challenges, as we see it, have always been for journals and will likely be for quite a while to come. Issues of field legitimacy, how in an era of print journals do we make open access online journals seem or actually be legitimate, and 2, cost of production. However, there are a number of benefits, especially from the perspective of a library publisher. We offer a flexible and collaborative approach to journal production and creation. We have a strong focus on preservation and access over profit. We push the use of Creative Commons so that authors can retain copyright. We use ongoing development of platform and workflow tools, both within the library, but also with other outside institutions. And ultimately, this fosters creative solutions, collaboration, and healthy competition in the publishing technology landscape while helping us to keep costs comparatively low. And finally, we're part of the larger movement to reframe impact metrics and how a journal measures its significance within the academy. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. That was great. Lots of great advice for getting started, and I think lots of questions answered for sure. And now we will transition to Hugh, who's going to present on flipping a journal from his own experience working with the Journal of Algebraic Combinatorics.
So I'm going to be talking about an example of journal flipping, which is the Combinatorics, which was owned by Springer, and it this past year flipped to become an open access journal now called Algebraic Combinatorics. So let me just so I'm going to sort of walk you through the timeline of what happened and try to give you a sense of how that worked. And yeah, so in 1992, the Journal of Algebraic Combinatorics was founded. It was published by Kluwer at the time, which was later bought by Springer. And so algebraic combinatorics is a kind of particular like subdiscipline within math, and which had really started to take off a few years before that, but there was a sense that it was a mature field, a mature subfield that needed its own journal, and so it was established, and it established a reputation for itself as the best place to publish stuff in its discipline. So in the spring of 2016, we fast forward, in the spring of 2016, there were discussions among the editors-in-chief about leaving Springer. In October, I joined the editors-in-chief in part of the normal renewal process. So all of them had contracts that were going to end at the same time. And so in the normal courses, they would have come up for renewal. In the spring, discussions found interim editors-in-chief for the Flip Journal and the Centre Mersenne in France to host the Flip Journal. In 2017, we talked to the members of Agreed. They agreed with the idea of the Flip. And at the end of June 2017, Chief submitted our resignations to Springer, effective at the end of the year. So it was part of our contract that we had to give them 6 months notice. So that's what we did. But we were stuck for those remaining 6 months. We were stuck continuing to fulfill our contractual obligations. In July, an email was sent out by the interim editors-in-chief to a list of email addresses of colleagues in the discipline announcing the flip and encouraging people not to cooperate with the Journal of Algebraic Combinatorics. So people withdrew their papers. Not everyone, but some people did. Many people did. Many were contacted and asked to serve on the editorial board, or were asked to become editors-in-chief. Many people declined. Some people did not decline. In January, of this year, the former editors-in-chief, who were no longer bound by contract, took over as editors-in-chief. And at the end of January, the first issue came out. And we've had, since then, 5 issues this year. We expect to be publishing an issue every 2 months in the future and in an ongoing way. Yeah, so that's the story in a nutshell. There are some things to reflect on. It was really interesting, actually, to hear in the presentation that preceded this one the concern about legitimacy, and it's really, I mean, it's a measure of how well everything has gone that I really feel like people are just taking our journal seriously, and viewing it as I believe it deserves to be viewed, as the continuation of this formerly existing, highly regarded journal, and it is the continuation, and I think it's viewed that way, and the fact that it is electronic only is not really a big deal, I think. And there's generally been support from a lot of different directions. From the board, support from people submitting. We are getting roughly the same quantity of submissions as before, though not as much junk. So apparently, being a journal published by Springer entitled us to get a bunch of junk submissions, which we don't get anymore. I mean, in the end, people will presumably catch on and start sending us more junk as well. But anyway. And there's been support from colleagues, which has been, encouraging here. Another thing that's been nice about carrying out the flip has been an opportunity to rethink things, which, I mean, in a sense, could have been done at any time, really, but hadn't been. So the board basically hadn't changed since 1992 when the journal was founded, and I think that's probably not viewed as best practices. It was basically the same board it was 25 years ago, and the gender balance was terrible, and so we moved to fix that really right away, and we spend time now putting some serious time into thinking about board structure and the constitution for the journal, how we want to, build a better journal going forward. As it played out for us, Springer was professional. There weren't legal threats. So the Springer is still keeping the Journal of Algebraic Combinatorics. They did find people to be on the editorial board. Interestingly, I would say not primarily people really from our, not primarily people from our area, but some prominent people who were less willing, or who were willing to, attach their name to the journal. It's still going. We are still getting, as I said, the similar level of submissions. We're not getting as much stuff from all the subdisciplines of our subdiscipline, and we anticipate that has maybe to do with, not yet having, famous impact factors. That's something that takes time to establish, and some geographical locations in some parts of the world, impact factor is really, really, really crucial for your publication. And so I think that's meant that we've taken a hit from people in certain parts of the world. I mean, another thing to reflect on for me is the absence of paper copies. That's, I mean, I find that sad, but I don't find that it really has any kind of practical impact. I mean, I don't consult paper copies of journals by and large. So, and I think that's just true in my discipline, that's really the model now. Everybody is using the electronic material, even if there are physical paper journals available. So it's sad, but it's the way things have evolved. We have funding thanks to the organization Math OA, which exists to help support open access math journals. So we have funding for the next few years. In the longer term, that's something that still needs to be worked on. So yeah, I think that's what I wanted to tell you. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you so much, Hugh. That was really informative. And apologies to everyone out there for the technical troubles that we had. Unfortunately, can't predict what's going to happen with presenting live. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now to share some slides for our question and answers here. And it looks like we did get one question from the audience so far. So I'm going to jump down to that question here. Josephine asks, why did you remove the Journal of from your journal title? Was this just strategic move? So Hugh, that would be a question for you.
Right. We did that because Springer still owns the right to the title, the Journal of Algebraic Combinatorics, and in fact, they are still publishing a journal which they are still calling the Journal of Algebraic Combinatorics. So we needed a different name.
Sure, that makes sense. And when it comes to flipping a journal, I know a big question that people have is around those copyright concerns. I know you said that for your journal, it was a pretty smooth process. But that being said, did you have to do any research in that area to figure out how to go about flipping the journal while ensuring that you weren't, going to infringe on any copyright considerations?
Well, we had backup from the people at Math OA and their parent organization. We relied on their advice. I mean, legally speaking, we were just founding a new journal. It happened to have a certain overlap with the previously existing journal, but it's not. I don't think that Springer could really kick up a fuss that a bunch of academics are trying to start a journal in algebraic combinatorics.
Sure. Yes. And that is something that's interesting with the idea of journal flipping. I think that, it sounds I think the name sounds like it's taking an existing journal and just switching that. But I know in a lot of cases, flipping a journal really means starting a new comparable title. And of course, big example that many know about is the editors of Lingua starting Glossa. That is one example similarly where a new journal was formed. And we have another question here. Let's see. So this is for Michigan Publishing. Describe the lowest entry cost with the Michigan model.
Okay, that's a good question. So it really does depend, as Jaclyn said, on how many articles are being published per year. If someone were to do an annual journal, we typically charge, I think, roughly $1,000 for that first year and launch of the first journal. And that covers setting up the website that we build in-house and the XML conversion of any articles for that issue. But on top of that, you would have, if you wanted typesetting costs, which aren't significantly expensive, that's roughly $4 to $6 per page. Copy editing costs are a little bit higher, $5 to $7 per page if you want copy editing. So for a non-typeset journal for the first year, $1,000 roughly. Moving forward, we charge an annual upkeep fee on the website for the web hosting, which is about $750. And then XML article conversion is charged per article after that. And that's roughly $34 to $50, depending on how difficult the XML conversion is, which is usually field dependent. So, and compared to other publishers, this is roughly half the cost of other publishers in producing sort of a print journal that also has an online component.
Sure. And we have another question for Michigan. Are your journals listed in the directory of open access journals, or most of the journals that you publish listed there? And I know from the journals that we work with at Scholastica that is, of course, a process of applying and getting accepted and all of that. So maybe you could speak to kind of that process as well. How do you go about helping journals get indexed?
Yeah, so one of the things that we try to do is figure out what it is that a journal needs to be indexed in order to, be considered, as Hugh is kind of pointing out, legitimate, because certain fields require certain indexing standards in order for a journal to count, a journal article to count toward for tenure and promotion. And the first place we always start, all of our journals are indexed with Google Scholar so that we can track them through Google Analytics. And then the next place we try to go is Directory of Open Access Journals, as you pointed out, Danielle. And we do walk all of our journals through that process, and most of our journals are currently indexed in the Directory of Open Access Journals. It usually takes about a year of publication and sometimes more in order to build up the number of articles. And I don't know if anyone has looked at the Directory of Open Access Journal application, but it's incredibly intensive, and there are a lot of steps that a journal has to sort of have met in order to be indexed with them. And so we do try to consult with all of our journals on, hey, Directory of Open Access Journals requires a statement on licensing terms. You don't currently have one. How do we, write one up so that it both fits your journal, but also helps you get into the directory? So we do work with every journal to do that.
Sure, yeah, and it definitely is a process, but so worth it in terms of discoverability, benefits, and legitimacy as well. Yeah. We have another question here. How do you deal with the confusion between the old Springer journal name for algebraic combinatorics and the new journal? And I guess, is there confusion?
I don't know. I guess we perhaps optimistically hoped that the old journal would die fast. And I don't know if that's in the cards. I mean, it's just hard to say. It's still pretty early days. There's some of the papers that they're still publishing are papers that people submitted when we were still the editors in chief. So, it's the change hasn't really sunk in terms of, like what we're seeing them publishing. They have, though, published a lot less this year than they were. So they've noticed that they aren't getting the submissions, they've cut back, etc. But will they be able to keep going? Maybe. And if they do, yeah, there will be two journals. They'll have similar names. I don't know. I mean, people usually call the Journal of Algebraic Combinatorics JACO, and they call our journal ALCO. I mean, I don't know. I think it's not a huge issue. I can see how it could be. I mean, there's lots of math journals that, like, there's JCTA and JCTB, and they're two different journals that used to be one journal, became two journals. But everybody knows them. I don't think it's a problem. That said, would we have voted differently if we had been planning for a long-term future with the Springer journal still going and our journal still going? Would we have wanted the names to be so similar? I don't know. I mean, we wanted the names to be similar because we did want people to make the logical connection that this is the continuation. So there is that.
Sure, yeah, it kind of helps with the transition at the same time. That makes sense. And we have another question, I think for Michigan. Can you discuss the cost of print-on-demand options per issue? And I guess, do you do much print-on-demand or any at all? I know in the presentation, the point was made that paper is, really on its way out. We've seen lots in recent reports of scholars transitioning away from paper. So I guess maybe as part of this question, you could speak to that as well. How do you deal with print-on-demand requests? Do you get many? Do you think it's important?
So I think we keep the option around because it is still important for a number of disciplines. We have a design journal that still prints copies, and we've also had discussions with a literary journal on campus about printing options. Print on demand is sort of a strange in-between for journal publishing, I think, because let's say like a small society publisher funds their publishing initiatives with membership dues, and the journal is part of that. It's sort of like a subscription. Our model of print on demand doesn't allow us to maintain subscription services for journals, and so it's sort of like this one-off distribution channel. Or we can of course do it like a short run, like print a number of copies, send that to someone. But cost effectiveness, I think that's the question there. I don't know if we steer. I think if a journal has the funds and if the print copy is still very important, like we want to be able to enable that. So
yeah, it's not something we necessarily steer people away from. It's just not something we push either. If they want to do it, they want to do it, and they bring that to us.
Sure, that makes sense. And we're getting close to time here, so we could take a couple more questions. One thing that we talked about in these presentations is the idea of impact metrics and sort of reframing them. We see new types of impact indicators becoming more popular now, such as altmetrics and other alternative metrics. Why do you think that's important in open access publishing, and sort of where does that fit into the conversation? I'd be interested to hear from everybody on this. So maybe we could start with Michigan. What are your thoughts on the reframing, of impact indicators?
I think from our perspective, essentially impact factors are largely corporate owned. So you're following the same problem where you have companies like Elsevier, EBSCO, Springer owning, journal copyright, but also, these different impact factors tend to be, in most cases, owned by corporations. And so like Clarivate, for example. And so I think our problem here is that we understand that people who want to, and this is actually why we sort of cited legitimacy as a regular issue in this publishing, especially for the humanities, where impact factors tend to not have as much of an, forgive the use of the word, impact on tenure and promotion. But we tend to suggest that, impact factors aren't necessary unless your field or your tenure and promotion requirements need them. Because we're much more interested in the journal as a product of, the publishers and the editors coming together to develop what their vision is. And we're less interested in whether or not a third-party corporate entity has said, yes, this has an impact factor and is therefore legitimate. We provide things like Google Analytics and altmetrics largely just so that journals can sort of see how they're being engaged with, because what altmetrics allows you to do is see how people are interacting with the article, where they're citing it and where they're discussing it. And so we think that is much more informative and helpful than just saying this article has X impact. Although we do recognize that that is necessary, and so we try to get our journals into whatever databases will provide that impact that is sort of necessary for the field.
Sure. And Hugh, I'd love to have your thoughts on this as well.
One one thing I would say, I guess, I don't think I have a lot to say specifically about different notions of impact factor. A thing that is exciting about the open access model is that because it's now our journal, we get to think about that. And if we want to think about that, and if we want to make changes based on that, we can. And so, I mean, impact factor is a thing we could be talking about. Other models of refereeing are things we could be talking about. There's various kinds of conversations that we could be having. I think for now, as a newly flipped journal, our main, or one of our chief goals is really to establish our legitimacy as the successor of the Journal of Algebraic Combinatorics. So we aren't trying to go crazy and change a lot of stuff. We want to go on doing basically the same thing. So we would still like to have, an impact factor. And I'll be pleased, when our impact factor is better than the impact factor of the Journal of Algebraic Combinatorics, which I expect to happen. I'll be happy about that. In the longer term, I totally agree with the issues around impact factor that were mentioned, and something more nuanced and less corporate controlled would be great.
Sure. And we are just about at time here. So I'm going to go ahead and give our last question. This is from Crystal. When charging authors for publication cost, what has been an ideal amount to charge? Does anybody want to field that one?
I think we probably only have one example of a journal charging authors, and that was sort of the donation model that I mentioned. And that's a philosophy journal, Philosopher's Imprint, and it's actually it's sort of an optional charge of $20, and with the notion that if you're not attached to an institution, that can easily be waived.
Sure. Yeah, and in terms of APCs, or article charges beyond that, I know just anecdotally that it does seem like it really depends on the discipline. Some disciplines will have more available funding for that. For some disciplines, it may not be much of an option at all for authors. So, perhaps kind of listening to authors and of course, knowing the situation in your field is really important there when choosing a funding model, I think. And with that, we'll make that our last question here. Thank you all so much. And thank you to the audience for submitting so many great questions. Really interesting discussion here. And I do have a couple of other resources if you're interested. If you're interested in learning more about journal management best practices and academic-led open access publishing, we have some additional content resources on our resources page at Scholastica, so we encourage you to check those out. And as I said, please be on the lookout for announcements about Academic-Led Publishing Day. We're very excited to be taking part in that event along with Michigan Publishing and the Free Journal Network, which Algebraic Combinatorics is a part of. And so with that, we want to just, again, thank everybody. Thank you so much to our guests for these great presentations, and we hope you all have a great day.